All right. Thank you very much. Friendly warning, I look like death just because I've been on the road for the last 2 weeks. But yeah, my name is Joe Shepard. I am president of United Rural Democrats. I am a sophomore at Iowa State University. Despite my age, I've already run a couple campaigns. I've won, I've run one United States Senate campaign here in the state of Iowa based on mostly ag issues and access to healthcare. And I ran a U.S. House race in Wisconsin last cycle, which went down in defeat. So I have a lot of experience dealing with state, local, and even national political kind of apparatus. And, after driving around Iowa, because this was before the pandemic, a lot of people, they voted for President Obama. They probably voted for President Clinton too before that. But then they felt sort of alienated from the Democratic Party. Now, obviously, East Tennessee is one of the most Republican places in the nation and has been since the time of Abraham Lincoln. So I'll just kind of preface everything I say here with, I think my ideas are universally applicable, but I am by no means, as an Iowan, a universal messenger. So bear that in mind when I say everything. But, a lot of people feel like the Democratic Party has left them in the dust. And, Iowa swung the hardest in 2016 from Democrat to Republican. And I think that a lot of these people, I've talked to them. I know them. They don't like Donald Trump that much, maybe personally, maybe there are policy differences they have with him. But I'll tell you one thing that unites them. They honest to God believe he is the only person who represents them in government. He's their guy. And when you only have one person in government, you come out for them in droves, which is what happened in 2020. So, after interacting with all these people, I decided to found URD because I feel like the Democratic Party can take back a lot of these areas if we just go out there and listen to what people on the ground need and want from their elected leaders. So I've been speaking to local groups like yours for roughly the past 8 months at this point, just kind of listening to see what is important to people in, your part of the country, and just trying to build what we can. So right now I have about 200 organizers in roughly 40 states. Tennessee is one of the last in which we do not have any. Hopefully that changes soon. But essentially, they just kind of do what I do. They go to local meetings, they meet with people on the ground, and just try and determine what is needed to be done. Since January 1st, I've spoken with roughly 4,000 people on the phone from every state in the union except Hawaii, just sort of talking to them about what matters to them and how that can be fixed. Additionally, I have driven 24,000 miles and visited 28 states. Thank God for Zoom University, otherwise this would not be possible. So I think that, many states, communities, counties can be taken back by the Democratic Party if we really focus on local issues. Because obviously, Washington County, the first district in general, is incredibly red. But in the event there is a chance to take back a statewide office in the near future, it's going to be incumbent that we grind that 90-10 margin down to something a little less. So, and that comes through a better understanding of local issues. So that's kind of where we come in. My hope is to actually come out and visit East Tennessee once again. I was there in January. I did not have much time there, but I was able to talk to a few people. And I think that, it is I know in the South, particularly Appalachia, we'll talk about ancestral Democrats. I think this is one of the few areas that's like ancestral Republican outside of like Indiana and Iowa. But whatever the case, we've been able to do quite a few things already in our short existence. One, we organized in a district in Louisiana's 5th Congressional District, which is, I believe, the most pro-Trump district in the state of Louisiana. And while we did not win, we were able to make over 50,000 calls into the district, and we were able to swing it about 11 points towards the Democrats. Then last weekend, which is why I'm so tired, we were helping a state Senate candidate in Oklahoma's 22nd Senate district, which is like half rural, half suburban. It's on the edge of the Oklahoma City metro. And we were able to send 14 organizers from every corner of the country to Oklahoma. Now, people in Oklahoma I've spoken to say that, people on the outside don't care about them. People on the outside scorn us, whatever you want to say. And I think that does apply to Tennessee based on my conversations with many people in your state. But I think that the fact that we had people from, New York and Florida and Arizona and North Dakota all coming out for this race in Oklahoma, I think that's a direct refutation of that. So moving forward, we're just going to continue building our network out in various states, including Tennessee. And I think that starts on the local level, because obviously redistricting is going to be a mess in many states, including basically every state in the Midwest. However, great candidates come and go. District lines change. But Washington County is probably going to look the same today as the day we die, geographically speaking. So it's easier to organize on that level. So beyond that, I'm happy to answer any real questions anyone has about the organization, what we do. Apologies, I'm absolutely whipped today since I'm currently on the Illinois-Iowa border, so I've got 4 hours to go till I get home. But, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. And if not, I'll just put our contact information, our fundraising information, and everything else in the chat, just because, that's how we grow. I think that is sort of what's caused our really rapid growth, because I may not know the most about Tennessee, truthfully speaking, but I understand that, rural hospitals are a real issue, especially with the Lee administration just gutting the budget. I was featured in The Hill in December and actually brought that up, that, even during a pandemic, your state has lost 20 hospitals in the last year, mostly in rural areas. I don't care what your politics are, death doesn't have a party. So I think if we can reach people on issues like that, we can really make headway. So that's basically it on my front. If anybody has any further questions, I'll drop our email, and you can follow us on Twitter at rural_United.
Yeah, and you're on Instagram too, right?
We are. I believe it's also rural_United, or it's rural United one thing.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask Joe. Debbie has a question.
Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to clarify to be sure I thought I heard what you said, and that is because it was a little surprising. And so bringing in folks from other states to talk to rural voters made those rural voters feel more important. Is that what you were saying?
No.
Okay.
We brought in those people mostly for the purpose of GOTV, that final weekend of door knocking and just kind of additional manpower on the ground. Most of that talking to voter stuff, unless it's within their own state, is done by me personally. So if it's, for example, the state of Indiana, where we have a lot of people currently, I'll have my Indiana people do that within Indiana, preferably within their own region of Indiana, but I wouldn't have them doing that in a state like Oklahoma.
Okay.
So apologies for the misunderstanding on that. I'm a political psychology major, so truthfully, this is kind of a dream for me, doing all this stuff.
Thank you. Dan's got a question.
Sure.
Hey, Joe, thanks for being on. I'm actually not from Washington County. I'm from Johnson County, which is more rural than anywhere else in Tennessee. It's the farthest northeast county in Tennessee, and when it comes to rural counties in Tennessee, it's as rural as it gets. But my question to you is, did you read the RSC working class memo that Jim Banks sent to Kevin McCarthy on the 30th? It was posted on NPR today. And basically what it is the Republicans' strategy memo for attracting and cementing rural and blue collar voters as Republican voters. As we all know, that's who the blue collar and rural Democratic or historically Democratic voters were the reason that Donald Trump won the election. Some of them swung back during the last election cycle, but mostly out of revulsion against Trump. And of course, what this memo is saying is we Republicans need a strategy to further cement these people as our voters. What is your response to that, if any? And what is your strategy to combat what the Republicans are now seeing as their next big demographic inroad? And I'll shut up now.
So I haven't read that memo, although that doesn't surprise me that they want to do that, just because ever since, the 2020 election, I've seen a million tweets from Republican Twitter about how Republicans are the party of the working class. So I do see where they're coming from on that, but I do think that they will hit some speed bumps, especially in the Midwest with that strategy, which is the area that is arguably the most competed over by both parties at this point. The thing I'll say with that is I think a lot of blue collar people are a little more socially conservative than the Democratic Party nationally would like to acknowledge. And I do think that sort of the way our economy is changing over the past 30 to 40 years has caused a bit of discomfort, which, was able to really attract them to Trump and his message in 2016. However, I do think that once Donald Trump is sort of out of the picture, whether that's in 2024 or 2028, the Republican Party is really going to struggle, just because a lot of those people, they may, like Trump, but they don't like austerity. They don't like fiscal conservatism as much necessarily. They don't like these things. So, for example, in Tennessee, I know you have an issue with hospital closures in recent years. Once you start doing that in states like Wisconsin or Michigan or places like that, you're going to lose those votes again, just because, they may side with you on the culture war. They may side with you on immigration. They may side with you on, tariffs, whatever that it may be. But when it comes down to that kind of social safety net, I think unless the Republicans surprise me and move to the left on economics, which I don't see happening, their strategy may have short-term successes in some areas, but will at large fail.
Thank you.
And I think the way to combat it is just kind of go on the ground and say, hey, we're the party of the working class, and here's what we can do for you, and here's what we have done for you. And if you elect us again, and if you support our candidates, here's what we can. I think that's just what we got to do, because a lot of people, I don't care what their politics are relatively apolitical. I would say the majority of Americans are apolitical. They just want what's best for their family and their community. So if reckless economic policies by the Republicans are causing these communities further strife, and you can connect the dots on them, then that policy and that new idea of theirs is going to shatter. Especially with Jim Banks. I mean, Jim Banks is actually, I think he is going to be a pretty dangerous player in the future, especially in Indiana politics. But he's sort of on borrowed time, because his district, for those who don't know, is the most Republican district in Indiana. It's in Northeast Indiana. It's anchored with Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne is becoming blue very quickly. And it is possible that by the end of this decade, or sometime in the next decade, that district could become more competitive, even winnable in a wave. So I think that people like him kind of see the writing on the wall and are going to try. But I think as long as we play smart and continue just pushing, this is what we can do for you. This is how they failed you. Give us a shot, especially in areas like York, part of the state. That's how we can do it. That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah.
Now, I think I will just kind of add at the end, I am speaking as an Iowan, and we are the most elastic voters in the country. But I think broadly speaking, from my conversations with people in other states, that's really how it's going to play out in most areas. I do think the Republicans can make gains in some places, but by and large, the moment they start playing with the fiscal stuff, they're going to hit a wall.
Yeah. Just a reminder, if you have a question, just digitally raise your hand in Zoom. Edwin, I see your hands raised. If you'll want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, Edwin Williams. One of the things I wanted to ask about, and I'll make a note of. So I work in the construction industry here in Northeast Tennessee. And one of the things I have noticed is they are actually pretty optimistic about the infrastructure bill. And that is like a topic. I know we're talking about how Republicans are trying to use cultural wars to drive the shift. But also leaning into things like the infrastructure bill, where housing is that industry is dominated primarily by Republicans in the industry. NAHB leans conservative, those type of things. And one of the things on the local level, I'm one of the few, I think I'm the only Democrat in some of the organizations in the area, how do you get more activity from Democrats into organizations that are traditionally Republican organizations to get that? Because on the local level, it tends to be more about, say, for instance, where you're running a candidate who's a Democrat, it's more about that personal connection, because if the person knows them, regardless of politics, they're probably going to vote for them. So how do you get those people into the organizations to start really, one, interacting with Republicans on the personal level, especially in the business world, which then translates out into the general population. And then also, as you're doing that, translating what's happening at the national level in terms of, for instance, workforce development. Lee, and here in Tennessee, Governor Lee is really big on workforce development for the trades, something that I've noticed and I see a lot of activity in here in Tennessee. So what are your thoughts on Democrats leaning into that in terms of reaching out to Republican voters?
Of course. So I do think that personal connection, especially in like smaller races like state representative, county commissioner, school board, that can trump basically anything. If you're well respected in your community, that's a very good trump card. Going with kind of these Republican communities, like I know, in Wisconsin, the only Republican union that does anything is the builders one. So I do understand that. I think two things. One, to engage in these communities, we initially have to go in just as your name is Edwin, right? I'm bad with names. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes.
So just, you go in there as Edwin, not as a Democrat, just as, just another guy who lives in Washington County. Because I'll tell you a bit of a story. I was in northern Louisiana on a little bit of road trip helping a campaign we were supporting. And I can tell you, I met with some people who were QAnoners. They were very right wing, very pro-Trump. But, I was talking with them about how their communities were falling apart and they didn't know what they were going to do. And they were kind of scornful of the Republican Party at large, but they liked Trump because they liked his messaging. And I talked with them for, maybe 10 minutes at this little diner. And at the end of it, I just kind of tipped my hand. Oh, by the way, I'm a Democrat. And I noticed that, like, there were wheels turning in this guy's head. This guy is probably like 65 years old. And the wheels were turning in his head because in a lot of these communities, like, Democrats are simply not vocal in the slightest. So oftentimes there's this otherness cast upon them. So when they see that, hey, this guy's pretty normal, he makes sense, I like talking with him. Oh, he's a Democrat. Well, that makes me question what Democrats are. I think in areas that are deep red like that, I think that is the first step, because when they know that, hey, this guy who goes to my church is also a Democrat, and this guy, our kids play on the same high school football team. Once we can get those little community connections in there where it's like, oh, he's a Democrat. I don't know, like, what like the religious kind of affiliations are. And you're obviously Southern Baptist is big throughout the South, but like, if we can make it almost like they go to different churches instead of different political parties, I think that we can really make headway. And it's going to take time. I'm not denying that. But I think that's just how we do it, like bit by bit by bit. Hey, this guy's a normal guy. Maybe we don't have to, maybe he's not a baby killer. Obviously, you're not going to take my guns away. Maybe we can vote for you, something like that.
Thanks, Edwin, for the question. Dan, I know you had a follow-up question there. And just a reminder, if you're just joining us and you have a question for Joe Shepherd from the United Rural Democrats, feel free to digitally raise your hand. But Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kate, for allowing a follow-up. I don't want to dominate too much, but what I did want to ask, or sort of start off by saying, like, one of the candidates that we had in last election cycle was a candidate that we were able to make double-digit inroads on Republican voters in Johnson County, and that candidate was Blair Walsingham, who was running for the House of Representatives. I'm sorry?
Oh, I've heard of her.
Yeah. And the reason that she did so well is because she was very, very, very appealing to Republicans. So one thing you said that I disagree with a little bit is that it wasn't that people liked Trump and that's why they voted for him. They actually did not like him at all, but they liked the fact that they felt like he was talking to them in way, about things that no one else on the political scene was talking about. Things like the fact that, trade agreements were shipping jobs overseas, that the deck was stacked against them, and a lot of things like that. Blair was able to make a lot of inroads, even though she lost the election. She did very well in Johnson County comparatively to other Democratic candidates, because she did have a conservative message. She was pro-gun or pro-Second Amendment. She was, she was fairly, she was not pro-choice. She was a lot of things that were not necessarily what our voters considered to be Democratic issues. In other words, she was Democratic in the old school kind of 1950s way, as opposed to this. So the question I'm getting to, the follow-up question I'm getting to is, for rural Democrats, for rural counties, for people who are organizing rural, how do we overcome the perception that we are the party of Rashida Tlaib or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or even Nancy Pelosi, which are poisonous to our voters? How do we overcome that? And is that something that you are working on, developing a more palatable face of the Democratic Party for rural America? And I'll shut up now.
Of course. So I actually think that you and I agree, generally speaking, on the Trump thing. Just I think that, obviously this country is massive. And as I said at the beginning, I think the ideas I have are universally applicable, but I am not like the universal messenger. So I think that we are both correct in that sense, because I did hear some of what you said as well. So with regard to the kind of messaging, I live in what was Steve King's congressional district. It's been Republican basically since the time of Abraham Lincoln, with a couple exceptions. And, we had a great candidate in 2018 named J.D. Scholten, who he's an ex-baseball player. I think he played for the Chicago White Sox for a little bit. So he's like respected within like the community. It's a big congressional district, but it's pretty tight-knit. It's kind of weird like that. But whatever the case, this dude traveled 240,000 miles in his own painted RV during the campaign cycle. And he took this district, which is usually like 75-25 Republican, 70-30 Republican, and he made it 50 to 47. So he almost flipped a district that is like unthinkable. So I think that with regard to that, I think that we just need to sort of make our own branding. And I'm always happy to help with that, but I do think that the answers almost have to come from people like you in the community, just because, you live in Washington County, you live in Northeast Tennessee, you understand what matters specifically to the people. And I think that if you can kind of cast this difference, like, AOC, yeah, she is a Democrat, but I didn't know we lived in the Bronx. Nancy Pelosi, also a Democrat, but that's San Francisco. I live in Ames, Iowa. I didn't know that either of those was California or New York. I think that if we can sort of cast our own image of what we are, saying, we are members of whatever community we're referring to, I think that's how we can take back a lot of these areas. Because, with Blair, obviously she's not some New York liberal. Like when people in, Northeast Tennessee saw her, they saw a little bit more of themselves than, something that DNC might try and shovel onto you guys. So I think that's kind of the key takeaway, I'd say, that, I think you just have to sort of figure out what matters in these communities and then cast it out. Because, that's it. I mean, if you can make yourself relatable, then, I mean, that's really it, if we're being entirely frank. So we are developing that, but I do think that ultimately it's on the local level. If you have people who understand the community like the back of their hand, and somebody, when you see them walking down the street, they'll say, hey, this person represents me, my family's interests, my community's interests. I think that's how you do it. And I'm happy to work with any local group on those issues, but I think that, that's my broad take on it.